by what right, Rabbi, do you say that you know God better than they do? That your God is better than theirs? That you have an access that I can't claim to have, to knowing not just that there is a God, but to knowing his mind? You put it modestly, but it is a fantastically arrogant claim that you make, an incredibly immodest claim, and if made by a fanatic, or by a bully, or by a murderer, I'll take it to the next stage and reply directly to Karamazov and Smerdyakov. Isn't it rather the case that with God, anything is permissible? Once someone has said, God told me to do it, what is not allowed?
Do you think we need to be doing something in this country to address this? How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, you mean, should we in this country, I mean, have you not read what's been happening in Wisconsin?
Yes, I have.
A school for children who can only use sign language. And 200 of them have their childhoods completely wrecked by this priest. And treaties are addressed to the man who is now Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger, the man who was saying at the time that the only problem with the scandal was there was a press campaign against the church. The abuse was not the problem. The torture, the rape, only the revelation of it
Christopher,
was the problem. Nothing happens except that he forgives the priest who asks for forgiveness before he dies.
For several years I've been wondering, in the example of Cardinal Law from Boston, who now has a pretty terrific parish right outside the gates of the Vatican in Rome, why he and why should not the Pope be charged with being an accessory before or after the fact?
Well, you take the wind out of my sails, Mike, as you have before. I mean, maybe you remember with our colleague and mutual friend Chris Matthews a few years ago, I raised this question: why isn't Cardinal Law being at least interviewed by the forces of law and order? And the same thought obviously occurred to the Cardinal and to the Vatican, because he left the jurisdiction, was given a sinecure in Rome. He runs the San Maria Maggiore, if I'm not mistaken, and hasn't been back since, and voted in the election for the Vicar of Christ on Earth, as Catholics call the Pope. And I wrote then, and I believe now, that the fatal taint went straight to the top at that point. And now we have, as the head of the Church, someone who's personally as well as individually, as well as institutionally responsible for knowing of this, covering it up, and protecting not the children but the predators.
But this evening already we've had your suggestion that God is only really a guru, a friend when you're in need. I mean, he wouldn't do anything like bugger around with Job to prove a point. And which, if I now tell you, well, that must mean that that book is not the Word of God, you'd say, well, whoever believed that ever was the Word of God? Let me just tell you something. For hundreds and thousands of years, this kind of discussion would have been in most places impossible to have, or Sam and I would have been having it at the risk of our lives. Religion now comes to us in this smiley face, ingratiating way, because it's had to give so much ground, and because we know so much more. But you've no right to forget the way it behaved when it was strong, and when it really did believe that it had God on its side.
This magnificent astronomer and scientist and physician and humanist of Persia, who opposed the cruel, sadistic, verminous, ignorant mullahs of his day, I borrow the question: what is your authority for saying that you know something that I don't? And since God doesn't ever directly appear and say, do it this way, it's done for him, this is really convenient, by human representatives who claim to act in his name. So that's why I think your standard of proof should be a great deal higher, because if the reason this point is important to you is because it would mean real power in the only world that actually exists, which is the material world, of you over me. And you wonder why I'm not keen. Well, you know why atheists are to be pitied, don't you? They have no one to talk to when receiving a blowjob. So that if I'm asked, do I wish that religion would die out of the world, I sort of reply, no, I wouldn't have anyone to argue with. I mean, it is, after all, it is the original argument. Where religion ends, philosophy begins, just as where phony cosmological myths end, physics begins. So you have to know what the origins of the argument are. And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first. It grabbed the territory of explanation, because we are pattern-seeking mammals. We need to look for patterns and for logic, and we prefer, even in times like this, many people will prefer a conspiracy explanation to no theory at all, because they need to have some explanation. Well, religion comes from the time when we didn't know there was a germ theory to explain disease. So it was plague, it was God's will, and a curse. Didn't know we lived on a round planet. Didn't know there were round celestial bodies. Didn't know that our DNA makes us kin with other animals and indeed plants. So the study of it and the debate with it, I think, has to go on. You don't have to look far if you open your newspaper and go around the world, just do a quick tour d'horizon and see the ways in which the parties of God enjoin people to behave. In other words, I absolutely reject the grammar of your question, and I also very much resent, as I've told you before, gave you fair warning on this point, very much resent the smug religious assumption that anyone who can mention God has a moral edge on me. Not so. Go back and try again. If he's asking me, do I favor the decriminalization of marijuana, the answer is obviously yes, and not just for medical reasons. Though the most striking thing about marijuana is its medical properties. It's well known to help people deal with the horrible results of chemotherapy, namely intense nausea, which prevents people from recovering by making them unable to digest or keep down food. And it's also, bizarrely, I don't know why this is, I'm not a physician, but it's a very useful treatment for glaucoma, which is a very damaging condition for the eyes. But I just think it's beyond the competence of the state to decide a question like this, that you can't hope for the government to be able to control what substance somebody puts in their own body. So even if I thought marijuana was a poison, I still would say, the government is not going to be able to stop people and shouldn't try. The marijuana user commits a victimless crime, and it's really horrific that we make room in our prison system for people who've done no more than that. Who says, teach the argument. Let's hear both sides on evolution versus creationism. You'd be surprised by how tenacious that view is, how tenaciously, I mean to say, that view is held by some people. But I feel one might help to get us over some of that hurdle too. First, there isn't an argument. There's not. You don't hear people saying, well, children, chemistry class is over, and then we'll have a break, and then there'll be the alchemy period. After we've done our astronomy, darlings, it'll be the astrology class. You don't get that, and of course it would be ludicrous and hateful if it were proposed. But under the cover of religion, there's no stupidity that can't be advocated.
I think you're confusing the leap of faith with a risk or a chance. The leap of faith, which I attribute to Kierkegaard, not to the varieties of religious experience, is what's necessary to get you across a gap where no evidence exists, and where some of the evidence may be to the contrary. And the problem with that, though I can see the will behind it, is that you can't make it just once and find yourself on the other side. Faith got me across this chasm. Now I'm safe. You have to keep on making it. You have to keep on going to church, sometimes several times a week, to assure yourself you were right to believe it in the first place. And it becomes morbid and ritualistic and irrational. And you're back where you started, on the wrong side of the chasm. Otherwise, this argument, we wouldn't be having this argument if Christianity had an answer to any of this, or any other religion either.
The person who says, I'm a deist, I don't think all of this can be an accident, there must be some cosmic force, I say, I can't disprove it, though I think the cosmos functions without it, but you have all your work, sir, or ma'am, still ahead of you, before you can say that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person, let alone that he was the Son of God, let alone that his mother was a virgin, let alone that he was resurrected. None of these things, by the way, would prove he was the Son of God, if they did happen, nor would they prove that his doctrines were not erroneous. A resurrected person who was the son of a virgin could still be talking nonsense. There's no logic that says he must be right. If I'm having an argument with you, sir, and you say, you lose, boy chick, I say, how come? Because my mother never went to bed with another man. Your logic is faulty. I think